Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this very special episode of Climate Mahaul. My name is Zishan Salahuddin and I run the Center for Regional and Global Connectivity at the Bad Lab. The devastating floods in 2022 have brought to the fore the discussion about how adversely climate change affects things in Pakistan. This particular conversation today is also sandwiched by the upcoming COP27 agenda that is going to happen next week. We have a very high-profile guest with us here today to talk about this issue, Ms. Afia Salam. Afia has been one of Pakistan's very first female journalists in the field of sports. She has been the editor of multiple magazines. She has been on television. She's a content creator. She's a trainer. Her CV is as long as the day. So instead of getting through all of that, perhaps a better idea would be to just launch into the conversation because of her recent work on climate change and climate justice. Welcome, Afia. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Very, very happy to have you here. I guess because given your career in media, I think the first thing that I would like to start off with is when these floods happened, the conversation was front and center in the media. Everyone was covering it, wall-to-wall coverage. But now that the story seems to have gone a little stale, it's almost as if, especially if you were to look at the political rivalry that is unfolding on our television screens, it seems almost as if the floods never happened. And by virtue of that, the climate change conversation has just all but dwindled. And I guess my question is, how do we make the climate change conversation, which is effectively an existential crisis, not just for Pakistan, but for the world, front and center to ensure that the media continues to cover it and continues to build momentum and noise around it?
So, thank you for having me. It's an unfortunate thing because I belong to the media and I hate sort of, knocking down the fraternity I belong to. Media has not covered these floods as a climate change event. That has been, that has sort of streamed into that story later. It has covered it as a disaster story. So media covers events, unfortunately. Very few media outlets consistently cover issues. So that is a problem why it has receded from our memory so soon. There are people in 3-4 districts who are still underwater, whose places are underwater. There are several million people who still don't have homes, who still don't have a roof over their head, leave alone homes. Roof over their heads mean even tents. And yes, it has receded despite the fact that we are into the COP in a few days. And the conversation, instead of peaking, has dropped down. And everything else is back to routine. The political rivalries are back to routine. The conflicts and other conversations are there. And so I come from the part of the country which is most, impacted by the floods. And when I get out of there, come to this part of the country, it really is as if, people don't know that such a big disaster had struck us. So yes, you're right. So how do we keep it centered is that the conversation on climate change needs to happen a lot more within the media as part of trainings, as awareness building. And we have trained reporters to death, But it's the decision makers who drive what goes on the media. So the reporter will only cover what they've been asked to cover, unless they are very senior reporters who have the liberty to, go do investigative things and chase their sources and come up with the story. But generally it is what they've been assigned. And unless and until the gatekeepers at the media houses are sensitized to the existential crisis, yes, for the world, but for Pakistan, because it's not only now that we are feeling the impacts of climate change. Pakistan has consistently been in the top 10 bracket of the vulnerability index that is issued every year. And out of almost 200 countries in the world, if you are in the top 10 bracket, you would expect the kind of conversation, the level of conversation or the prioritization of such conversations to be much higher than we have seen. So again, events, and then we start talking about climate change, yes. But will we keep on talking about climate change if there was no such event? That's my question.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think tying everything to something that has happened, whether that is locusts affecting crops or heat waves or floods or droughts, whatever the case may be, unless there's I remember very clearly once when I was working in media, one of the things that was asked of me was I wanted to cover a very positive story about a female who had been putting her kids through school despite her husband having passed away. And the first question asked of me was, but what's the misery, sort of dramatic angle in this? And that if that is going to be the focus, then obviously this is a problem. But I do agree with you in that because multiple trainings have been conducted, the CEJ in Karachi has been conducting these trainings, the Danish embassy in Islamabad has been conducting these trainings, that perhaps it's a better idea to sensitize the gatekeepers, the decision makers, your director news, your channel owners, as well as very, very senior anchors, and that might create the momentum for this moving forward. So connected to that, I guess, is my next question, and that is about if we are going to look at, say we manage to, through some miracle, have a concerted, concentrated conversation about climate change in the media, how can then that be leveraged to pursue climate justice?
So, because across the board amongst our people also, that realization is not there. ये हो गया, Allah की मर्जी. Yes, Allah की मर्जी हर चीज में, but the point is there are certain factors that are driving these disasters our way. So, you can only feel the need to access justice if you feel done hard by. If you don't think that has happened to you due to somebody else's actions, then what justice are you going to ask for? So that conversation can only peak once people realize what is happening from other parts of the world and within our own borders. There are things that actions, had they been taken, that may not have, they may have lessened the impact of the climate events. So that's when those questions can be asked, the difficult questions. Okay, why wasn't this done? Why weren't resources allocated here? Why wasn't this structure climate proofed? All those things. So the sensitization needs to seep through all strata of society, because we must remember climate change isn't about a ministry or a department. It impacts every single thing. Even the kind of vehicle you drive is connected to the climate actions. The kind of crop you grow is connected to climate actions. The kind of food you take, the kind of your your consumption patterns, the materials you use, all of these can be linked back. So there are so many things that need to be part of the normal conversation about the development of our country, about where we are going, where we want to go, and how will we get there. That doesn't happen.
So pivoting a little bit, I guess one of the things that I would like to talk to you about is Pakistan's own internal capacity. Because one of the things that has consistently come up is that under the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, we have some very big numbers. So we've said that by 2030 we will reduce emissions by 50%, but 35 of that 50% is only going to happen if external funding is actually provided to Pakistan, and that figure hovers around $110 billion, which is a tremendous amount that you're the expert in this, so I don't really know if that's even feasible, but I don't think that money is coming to Pakistan. Also, the fact that renewable energy sources need to be up by 60%, the usage of electric vehicles needs to go up by 30%. And these are, very rounded sort of figures, and they're good to have as talking points or to serve as bait for media. But by 2030, are any of these targets actually realistic or achievable?
So these NDCs, like when you unpack it, is nationally determined contribution. If we do this, this is what we reduce. But before we talk about that, we must also put across the fact that we only contribute less than 1% of the global emissions. And of those less than 1%, we are giving our commitment that we will reduce even further. And they are conditional. Yes, we can only do so much, but for the rest, we need external resources. And this is not just a country commitment, because these commitments are conditional on the other countries coming up with because this is a global, as you mentioned, this is a global existential crisis. So when at the negotiating table it was decided to come up with the NDC mechanism, there were countries which said we will mitigate, we will reduce our emissions so much, and there will be this pot of money to help countries who do not have that kind of access to resources to be able to meet their commitments. Now, until that happens, It means we can only do 30% of the job, which is still a lot considering we don't really emit. But yes, it is not just, a piece of the pie that we are looking at. We need to do it for our future as well. Electronic vehicles are what we should have, irrespective of, that we should do it because of climate change. Yes, that's a cleaner way to live. That's a healthier way, healthier environment for our people. We need to do that. Renewable energy is the way to go forward. So all those things should also be seen as a forward-looking trajectory, development trajectory. But then again, how do we do it? So unless and until we get that external financing, you saying, I don't see it coming, that unfortunately is the way many people are looking at it, because the earlier commitments have not been met.
Yep.
Post-Paris, all those pots of money that were supposed to be available for countries like Pakistan to be able to do fast-track meeting these commitments are not full, or at least they are not full of the amount that was committed. So to expect countries like us to be able to do everything that we have committed is unrealistic and unfair. This is why, that the word justice has come in the context of climate change. One aspect of justice is stop triggering climate change. That is something we can't do anything about because we are not responsible for that. But the other is help others also to come up to the level where all of us can meet those shared commitments of keeping the temperature down.
Yeah. I find there to be an interesting juxtaposition between the overall global need to move towards renewable green energy, while at the same time, countries and economies that are still in the developing stage, like Pakistan, needing to use fossil fuels in order to drive its economy. And that juxtaposition, of course, is a bit of a tug of war, because you want to reduce the greenhouse gases, but at the same time, you cannot abandon or give up on your economy that desperately needs a robust energy sector in order for it to perform. I don't know what the solution to that is, but connected to that, I guess, is I spoke about capacity. One of the criticisms that came up during these recent floods was that, sure, it was 500% times more rainfall that was observed, and really nobody in the world can sort of prepare for that. But the entire process and the ensuing and unfolding events were exacerbated by the fact that we have very poor governance structures. Yes. And there's not a lot of lessons learned, especially from the 2010, 11, 12, 13 floods. Not to mention the fact that we live on the Indus River's ecosystem, which means we should be used to this, but it appears that every year it comes as a shock that floods are going to happen again. So I guess my question is, what is the most important area in governance that we are lacking, that we need to bolster up, and where do we begin with that?
Okay, so first off, before answering that question, I would like to make a very clear distinction here, that the 2010 floods and 2022 floods are completely different from each other. It's got nothing to do with us living in the Indus basin, because these came from Koh-i-Suleiman, came from Balochistan. The element of climate change over here was that the monsoon system shifted to a new area. Balochistan is not a monsoon area, neither is southern Punjab. Two monsoon systems shifted into that geographical area, and there was, as you mentioned, tremendously torrential rainfall for many days. And then we need to look at our geography. It came down as hill torrents. Indus River, in this entire period when we were having floods, didn't flood. Indus River, twice the water came and went into the sea calmly without bursting its banks anywhere. So these are different floods. Now, but that is where the difference ends. The similarity is in the slow response, in the inefficient kind of manner in which people were taken out from those areas, in which aid was provided, in which they were rescued and provided relief. So there, the capacity, the governance structures, or rather the lack of governance or the lack of preparedness, I would say. So what we unfortunately do is we try to manage a disaster. We don't try to prevent it. We are not response ready. in a country which is prone to disasters, which had received an early warning somewhere in April that there will be more than normal rainfall. It was communicated by our Met Office. It was received by a Met Office by a South Asian monsoon forecasting body, of which Pakistan is also a member. And the rains happened in July, right? And yet we see the same kind of response. Okay, send it to the DCs. So the governance structure that was after 2010 that was built with the NDMA, PDMA, and DDMAs is hanging in midair because there is no local body structure, there is no DDMA. And it can, a disaster of this scale, especially in a country as big as Pakistan, as vast as Pakistan, where you have population scattered. It's not, it's concentrated in an area where all your resources can be funneled and people can be taken care of. In Balochistan, it's a huge area and they're very, very small settlements. To be able to reach them, the easiest way is your local body, your local Nazim, your local, people. They could have easily identified the needs and fulfill them, but we do not have any lower tier governance structure anywhere in the country, and this is why to be able to get to that response, it took a lot of time. And the other, and I must say it, and it's up to you whether you want to keep it or you can chop it out, the government's sledgehammer approach towards the civil society organizations and the NGOs has actually decimated them. So they have the people, they have the capacity, they have the knowledge to deal with these because they are from those communities which are now hit by disasters. But what they are not able to do is they don't have the resources. And the resources they had access to earlier, they had that whole chain. They were connected with other donors and other development agencies who used to help them. And that complete network was decimated. And yet they are the ones, even in this poor condition, that they are the first responders. You will see somebody from some NGO who knew how to approach people and ask for help and get, wading in water and getting somebody, or getting even from the district administration or from the PDMA to ask them to take these things, reaching to the PAF through airdrop. If it was a coordinated effort, a lot more people would have been rescued much earlier. The dewatering pump would have started much earlier. The health emergency, which became the second biggest disaster after the water, would have been avoided to a much greater extent. So that hasn't happened, and that I totally would like to lay the blame at the lack of governance.
I agree with you in that, the pendulum swung towards one side, which was allowing a lot of these proscribed organizations with their, Falahi wings or whatever you want to call them, operating with impunity across the country. And then when the hammer cracked and, we had this very sort of reactive national security structure, a lot of these organizations were banned, not really cleared by the EAD, and I think that's what you're referring to. That whole process gutted a lot of these indigenous organizations that could have been tremendous in terms of helping out in these localized, or at least the localized focus of these disasters. I'll move on to COP27. It's coming up. At the time of this recording, it's 3 or 4 days away. My first question to you is, I find it fascinating that the largest climate conversation on Earth is sponsored by Coke, first of all. And the fact that, there have been statements made by, Greta Thunberg also made the statement about how this is more greenwashing than anything else. And the lack of robust civil society presence effectively means this is just a platform for leaders to be able to stoke their egos and, say big words, and that's going to be the end of it. How do you view all this?
Okay, so my view is slightly different. There may be an element of greenwashing, I'm not going to deny that. Many big organizations or other companies indulge in it. But in Paris, along with these mechanisms, the financial mechanisms, there was another stream which was called NMM, New Market Mechanisms, in which it was said that the private sector has to be engaged. And the private sector has to be engaged for two reasons. Because for a reason, that the name of the company you just took, it raises the antenna, because they are seen as polluters, right? If you don't engage, they will remain as polluters, they will keep on polluting. But if you engage and get them on board, they start, and by this I don't mean just this one company, there are many different products that are made which are harmful, or the processes are harmful for the environment. You start with the cleaning of the processes, and many companies have done that. Even in Pakistan, many of the textiles, the big textiles who are the export-oriented textiles, because of that, because of the compliances, because of the new realization that they have to be green processes, they have gone into closed-loop production. They have started, many companies have started to take out of the system the pollution that they produce. And the other reason is that they have not just a lot of money to spend, they are easier to convince and then get those resources available for the help of people, for adaptive measures. Then we have seen the governments who commit and then they don't deliver. At a smaller scale, obviously, they are not going to contribute the 100 billion to the pot of money that the governments had promised to contribute. But within their area of operation, they can not only clean up their processes, they can help the communities living there adapt where adaptation is necessary. So their cleaning of the processes is part of the mitigation. And then the money that they can spare, and they do for many things. I mean, rather than having them just sponsor a seminar or a book launch or something of that small, a bigger integrated approach to get them as allies. So it's a difficult route, it's a long route. You sell your soul to the devil. Many people say that you're selling the soul to the devil, yes. But we have seen the harm of not engaging, because then their processes will keep on polluting our world. So it has to be a demand and supply. Both sides you have to, squeeze to be able to come to a better solution. You can't just say that we keep on pointing out fingers at them and they keep on polluting because they say, who are you? I mean, why should we listen to you? We are getting our profits. So it's a difficult, it's really tightrope walking to try to show that there is a moral angle to it also, and there's a business angle to it also, and there's an environmental angle to it also. Not everybody is convinced. I also am not fully convinced that this is the only way. Maybe there is a better way, but engagement, yes, I do believe in. You cannot leave such a big sector out of the conversation and let them do whatever they've been doing.
Very fair point. I'll reiterate the other part of the question, and that was about is the whole purpose. What is the whole purpose of COP27? So in this particular COP27, I guess I'll follow up with a couple of quick questions. And one of them is the promises that were made in COP26. Were any of them fulfilled? The second question is, are we just looking forward to this entire event with this massive presence and sort of global appeal wrapping up with a range of newer or upgraded promises that will also not go anywhere? And where do we go from here? Is it just one COP to another? Are we going from COP27 to 28 to 29 without really any, tangible, demonstrable, empirical benefits coming out of it outside of statements? So
since this is coming at the heels of this very big disaster that everybody's attention was focused on in Pakistan, but we are not the only country. Right now in many African countries, there's these raging floods. Philippines was impacted around the same time. Bengaluru in India was impacted around the same time, and China was suffering from drought in the rainy season. So probably the push for not only filling those, kitties, which, according to the previous promises, will be more resounding, the demand, but also the mechanism that had been seen as a way forward, which was of loss and damage, and it only remained a very meek, muted conversation, will now get center stage. And it must. All the leaders going from the global south, or rather all the vulnerable countries and the impacted countries, I think they'll have to make it their one-point agenda this time. So yes, COPs are seen as not delivering. If you look at the emissions report, they keep going up.
Yep.
We've had COPs. So I'm sure you know him as well as I do, Afia Salam, who's our very, a good friend as well as a leading environmental lawyer. He says it's 27 years of failure. If you look at if the COP was started to talk about cuts in emissions, and 27 years of successively increase in emissions shows at least that point is a failure. But then you can't say that disbanded, because in the similar manner, like I said, that if you completely sideline the corporates and let them do whatever damage they have been doing through their production processes, if you do not have this forum, can you see what's going to happen? There's nobody even there to call out the nations who are responsible for this. And it's a tough negotiation over there. They have prevailed. In fact, the fact that they had promised cuts in their emissions, the fact that they promised the funding is also a measure of success of the countries who had demanded those things. That they have not delivered is the second push that needs to come now from those very countries who brought them to that level where they agreed to emission cuts. So I think this calls for a stronger and united diplomatic front from the countries which have been more impacted, like the global south, entire global south.
Of course. I agree. And I guess my last question related to that is, I agree with the united front part. I'm not sure how much of that is actually going to end up happening at COP27. I guess we'll see the news coming out of it and see how much of a united front the global south actually presents. My last question to you very quickly is, as far as Pakistan then itself is concerned, and I'm speaking because we can't really make anything binding or enforceable, what is it that Pakistan needs to do internally in the short to medium term in order to combat this massive crisis?
So earlier when we spoke about the lack of governance, or it's not only a lack of governance from the usual things we say, oh, there's corruption and there's inefficiency, etc. There's also lack of awareness. Climate change, unfortunately, has been also put in a silo earlier. And if we need to, what we need to do is to link it with the SDGs on the delivery side, because all kind of actions, whether it's the transport ministry, whether it is the housing ministry, whether it is any other ministry, they have to now think in terms of climate proofing Pakistan. And that is not the job of the climate change ministry. That takes your water and power and each and everything, because climate change is, cross-sectoral. So this is what we need to do, that this entire conversation in the context of the current disaster, at least now, because this is fresh in the mind, there needs to be a re-look at how we use governance to overcome our climate threats, and how do we then, trickle it down the governance level for actual implementation. And if you keep looking at your SDG chart, and don't forget, we are only a few years away of missing targets yet again. MDGs, we did the same. So that is the way forward, because if you want to end hunger and you want to eliminate poverty, there are so many of those actions, because even the SDGs are not in silos. They're all connected to each other.
Of course.
So those can be seen, in my opinion, everybody can differ, but for me that seems the simplest way to look at the climate change problem, and I look at SDGs as a solution, meeting the SDGs as a solution. Adaptive measures.
Yep, and I think that also, it kills multiple birds with a single stone, in that not only are you fulfilling your international obligations, but you're actually also improving governance structures within Pakistan. And I think after the 18th Amendment especially, that devolution, which hasn't really happened at the DD level, might have happened to some extent at the PD level, is absolutely crucial and critical.
It's crucial. It's crucial. Because again, this is a very oft quoted thing. They think global, act local. It's been coined for a reason. There's a very solid reason for it. Responses.
I want to thank you, Afia, for being with us here today. This has been a tremendous conversation. I'm sure our audience has also learned a plethora of new information and has new ways of sort of approaching this and understanding this massive problem. So thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
And we hope to have you here again soon.
Thank you.
And thank you to the audience for joining us. This has been a very special episode for Climate Mahaul. My name is Zishan Salahuddin, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye. and Khuda Hafiz.